Hi, this is Ella and Amanda. We are on another episode of Tales of a TC. I've been a TC for over 2 years now, and I focus on creative finance TC transactions. So, sorry, we're very new to this podcast thing, and we are just trying to really put some information out there for investors and other TCs in this space and really just get down into the weeds of what it looks like to be a creative transaction coordinator. This is Amanda Spinney. She's a fellow TC of mine, actually, that I work with. Um, I'm just going to pass this over to her.
Yeah, no, we're excited to kind of talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, all of the sides of being a TC and kind of a behind the scenes curtain view. So, you had a great story we were talking about before we came on the air, which kind of leans into our theme this week of what it takes to be a good creative buyer. And so I was hoping you could kind of get into that story so that we can kind of pull it apart and give our 2 cents. I do want to add a disclaimer that obviously we are not attorneys, that everything that we're sharing is just coming from our experiences and the things that we've seen. And so there's zero legal advice and everything's for entertainment.
All entertainment purposes only.
Yes.
So, you know, having done as many transactions as we have, we come across a lot of different kinds of buyers. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially in this space with creative transactions, which is taking over people's mortgages or seller finance or a combination of the two, but mostly the ones that involve underlying mortgages, is that we need to have buyers who are more responsible in some ways, or in many ways, because at the end of the day, people's livelihoods are on the line. So buyers who are getting into sub twos because it's like the new shiny object, and wow, I can make all this money, $1,000 a month cash flow, because it's going to be the most amazing STR on the block. And things don't always pan out. But having investors that will take over a mortgage sub two and then simply rely on their income to make those mortgage payments and not pay the mortgage if they're not making the money they were thinking they were going to make is not okay. I think we need more vetting of our buyers, honestly. What has your experience been with that?
Yes. So I've noticed a lot of people misconstrue the idea of not bringing cash to close. And I think it's 100%. If you can buy properties without any of your own capital out of pocket, obviously that's great and that's ideal. But you still need to have money to manage a property long term. Things happen. I've bought properties that the pipes burst literally right after we close. I have a property right now that we can't find someone to put in the right fit to put into the property. We still have to make the mortgage payment on time. We still have to do these other things. And I think that there's a misunderstanding that just because we put these in an LLC or something like that, that we don't actually have a liability to the seller to anything. And I have a huge issue with buyers that believe the seller was in a terrible position when I took over the mortgage. There's flexibility in paying those payments. There's not.
Yeah. Things like, well, they were in arrears anyway, so if I'm 15 days late, it's fine. That's really not why we as investors take over other people's mortgages, especially when they were distressed to begin with. I had someone come to me and say, well, yeah, the lease option buyer that I put in there isn't making the payments, so I'm not paying the mortgage, and the seller was going to file bankruptcy anyway, so they're swimming in all this other debt. This doesn't really matter. That is not the way to think about these. At the end of the day, this is someone's livelihood on the line. Even if this person, this Mr. Seller, was to go and say, hey, sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure so I can get my property back, he now owes the mortgage company to the tune of about $25,000 plus legal fees, which, let's face it, he walked away with minimal amount of money, probably like about $1,000. These people are not in the position to take their properties back after someone has defaulted. If I feel like, investors should be better about communicating with sellers. They kind of it's this is not a traditional transaction where Mr. Buyer, Mr. Seller never have to meet, never have to know who the other person is. Like, this is a marriage, and you need to treat it as such in some ways. Communication is vital. If Mr. Buyer can't make the payments, Mr. Buyer has to come to the realization that, hey, maybe I'm in over my head. Maybe this isn't the thing that I should be doing. Let me deed the property back to Mr. Seller before things get really bad. Or make an honest attempt to try and fix the situation, but I think it's very easy to be a buyer these days, especially when you don't have to come in with your own money and you're just selling people on the idea that this is going to be a great investment. And things, like you said, things happen. Sometimes they're not great investments. And especially as a PML, be wary of coming in on a deal that is a low equity deal. Because if something happens and you need to foreclose, you're probably not going to get your money back.
Even if you want to foreclose, even if you have equity, if you're in a second lien position, my team has started setting it up to where anyone in a second lien position is getting the same authorizations as the buyer for the mortgage. Because what I've run into is, as we're working with the second lien position to try to intervene and take care of the first lien mortgage so they don't lose the house to the mortgage company, we're meeting resistance because that person didn't have the authorization, and so that's part of our requirement now on our agreements with our borrowers, is like, your next lien position has to be able to do that. And so it's really important that people that are walking into these positions know this is not a passive transaction. You want to make sure that that underlying mortgage is getting paid. You want to make sure that you're receiving those statements. If for some reason your borrower doesn't communicate with you, you want to have all of the information so you can call the mortgage company and make sure that that payment got made, because it's way better for a PML to jump in and make a payment over the phone than it is to find out 5 months later when the house is in foreclosure.
100%. And that's one of the things, like, being a creative TC, it's almost like the wild, wild west in some ways, because we are constantly coming across situations that require us to pivot and require us to change the way that we do things. Maybe like a year ago, it wasn't standard procedure to do something like that. And it's still not. Each TC finds the things that are problematic and tries to mitigate those by putting other documents in place, or double securing someone, or whatever the case is. But I think it's really important to take note of these things. And that's why, it's very important as an investor to have a TC, because how many hundreds of files haven't we done? Right? Whereas an investor maybe buys like one, two, unless you're Pace or Jerry Norton or, Jamil, where you're buying hundreds of properties. Average investor is really not buying that many properties. So we know the thing that you don't know because we have so much experience doing this. And I think that speaks to the value that a TC brings to the table when we get hired to do these deals. And even for PMLs, as a PML, I would never walk in on a deal if there wasn't a TC on it. Like, there has to, like, that's a prereq. There has to be a TC who knows what they're doing.
That's what I was going to say. A vetted TC.
A TC for sure.
And I get that everybody starts new in an industry and everybody tries to figure it out. And I think that it's really important to ensure that newer TCs are partnered with people that have experience and know what they're doing, because we do know those red flags. We do know that those concerns. And if you're a new investor, if you have a consult with a TC and they're not asking you all these additional questions to dig in to understand, then there's a gap. Like, yes, they are supposed to coordinate. They are supposed to make sure it goes through A to Z. But you and I talked about this last week. You and my's goal when we walk into a transaction is to ensure that every single party in that transaction is taken care of, not just our client.
100%.
And that's how you do good business. That's how we make sure as investors, you and I are also investors, we want this style of buying and this opportunity to be available in 10 years. The current path that investors are taking is not going to make that a reality because they're not taking care of their buyers. They're not taking care of their PMLs. We've worked transactions that the buyer doesn't tell us that they brought in a private money lender. The buyer is having that private money lender send funds on their behalf. They're not securing the private money lender. The private money lender is seeing a title report that is clean, but is being sent to 3-4 different private money lenders for funds. And it's, you have to be very careful on the type of business you're doing, the people you're working with. You have to do your due diligence no matter what part of the transaction. If you're the, if you're the realtor on the transaction, are you vetting that buyer? Are you making sure they have the funds to support your seller through this? Are you making sure that we're so lucky that there are realtors that are open-minded enough to help their sellers in this? But is the realtor doing the due diligence to make sure that the buyer is a good fit for the seller? It kind of cracks me up a little bit when I see everyone say like, oh, well, title companies do a TC's job. They do not.
Well, definitely.
And I'll say this from the rooftops. And I work with some crazy, great attorneys that have amazing disclosures and make sure like I have attorneys that put everything in layman's terms, all of the like legal documents to ensure that everyone understands. But there's still a lot of back and forth conversation.
Yeah.
There's still, I don't know how many times you've corrected settlement statements, but if I don't correct it at least 3 times, I probably missed something unless it's a miracle.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's just because everyone's human. And our deals, we're working like, let's say 20 transactions. Our title companies and our attorneys are working 100 transactions. The attention to detail is different.
It is way different, vastly different. And, a title company is also now going into the mortgage portal to make sure that everything that's on the mortgage statement is right. I've heard, and I haven't had it happen to me, but I've heard horror stories of people who have found out that they had received doctored mortgage statements. Let's face it, in this day and age, it's not very difficult to do that. So to have somebody, a third party, an independent, unbiased third party who can go in there and make sure that that mortgage statement is reflected in that portal, make sure that that escrow analysis is right. There's no unforeseen surprises coming up, making sure that they haven't started an application on HELOC, making sure like all of these things, the title company is not going to go in there and do that, let alone even ask for the credentials before closing, right? I've had title companies come to me or realtors tell me, well, no, they'll provide you that after you close. No, we're not closing unless we have that. This is not a traditional transaction. And even in a traditional, we wouldn't even need the mortgage statement and any of that information. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to take place on realtors as well. And also it's great to have realtors that are open to it, but it's like you said, a lot of times these people are in bad situations and the realtor's just trying to like get their property sold, right? They're not really understanding like, okay, well, what does this entail? Oh, great. So they're going to take over the mortgage. Perfect. But yes, you still need to vet the buyer. You still need to say, hey, is there enough funds in here to cover this mortgage for X amount of months if God forbid something happens? So, and oftentimes the realtor's not going to ask that. But even the wholesalers need to be more, diligent about that as well. And I think that everybody is counting their money before they're actually able to close. So they're just trying to do everything possible to make that close and not really be diligent or doing their due diligence or asking these questions or vetting their buyers. They're just like, oh, hey, you want to buy this? Okay, let me just sign this assignment contract. And meanwhile, the person has no real way of of supporting this property at all. So I think we need more questions for sure. It's not just about the money. Like, we need to do good business.
Agreed. And I think sometimes, like, even and some of it I get that you learn things with experience, right? Like, obviously I've been in the wrap space for a long time, and there's a lot of things that we didn't know until we learned, right?
Mm.
But that willingness to make it right, even when you are painfully learning those lessons, is the reality. And a lot of people are not walking into that space that, you know what, maybe I need to go, maybe this month I need to wholesale a couple extra deals so I can make sure I can cover my mortgage on this property that I committed. And, when I underwrite, I need to make sure no matter what my exit is, I don't care if you're wrapping a property. If you're not putting back operational costs on every payment, that's not just free cash flow, because things happen. Buyers stop making payments. You might have something pop up. If they get a hole in their roof that they can't pay to replace, as a lender, I want to make sure that you get your roof replaced so it doesn't destroy the asset.
Yeah, pipes bursting. I mean,
Yes, there's
that.
so many things.
Oh, speaking of things happening, insurance is a huge, huge.
Oh. If I hear one more person tell me that a seller's insurance is going to cover them, unless you're doing an executory contract and that policy becomes a renter's policy, that is not the case.
You know how many times I've heard, oh yeah, well, the seller's just going to leave it in place and they're just going to put me as additional insured, and it'll be fine. There's so many, I've had to school so many people about this.
And
Just
as a wholesaler, you need to make sure that your buyer has insurance before closing. You need to make sure that all of those boxes are checked to ensure that you have a good transaction at closing. You got a proof of funds. You made sure that there's insurance. You made sure everyone's communicated. Everyone has access to the portal, because at the end of the day, it could blow back on you too.
Oh yeah, but here's the thing: wholesalers tend not to deal with these things after they've happened. What is it? It's just a matter of switching out the number on their CRM, and that's it. Nobody can get a hold of them anymore, right? So when these things happen, who do the sellers come to?
Who answers the phone every time?
Every single time. Getting involved in transactions that we have already closed that are no longer our responsibility. But part of doing good business is recognizing when something has gone wrong and trying to help figure it out and trying to help get that seller back to, in communication with whoever it is that they need to get in communication with, or letting them know, hey, by the way, guess what? You have a promissory note and a mortgage or a deed of trust. So if you need to foreclose on this, you can. Although most times these sellers are not in the position to foreclose on any of these properties.
100%.
Again, communication is vital. These buyers need to be able to communicate with these sellers at all points in time. If you miss a payment, you need to let them know. It's, gosh, there's just so many things that make a good buyer and so many things that make a person not a good buyer. But I think, at the end of the day, you have to treat these mortgages as if they were your own.
100%. And so before we go, I wanted us to kind of compile a list for all wholesalers out there of what they should be looking for in their buyers.
Well, definitely a proof of funds, and not some transactionalfunding.com proof of funds, like legitimate proof of funds. And even better, settlement statements showing that they've bought properties before, and that they still have these properties, or that they, haven't defaulted on these mortgages. The same way that we would be vetting someone to buy conventionally, or even as an RMLO would be vetting somebody because they just collect certain pieces of documentation. But I think there's a lot that we can do. And really it falls on the wholesalers to get this done if they're assigning these deals to people. I have clients of mine that would not assign deals to end buyers unless they got certain pieces of information. like those proof of funds, legitimate proof of funds, like those settlement statements, like, show me where you are with your current mortgage, right? Like, show me these properties that you're still owning. Show me the most recent mortgage statement. Let me see that you're not
Yes.
behind, right? So it's important. It's really
Show
important.
me that you're not making the payment on the 10th. The grace period is not for you to stretch that out every single time, because that's a lot of anxiety. You talked about this previously, but that marriage with the seller, that's a lot of anxiety on a seller. Someone's coming in telling you that they're going to make these payments, and let's just say you call the bank on the 3rd to make sure that that payment's made, and it's not made. Like, that is not a partnership right there, that you're like creating goodwill. And, what's likely happening in that instance, let's just say the payment's not made on the 3rd, they're probably calling their realtor first. So now that realtor is like, I'm not doing these anymore.
Mhm.
They're calling everybody, and everyone's kind of getting this bad taste in their mouth because you're not taking care of the need that you said you take care of. I don't care how the mortgage looked when you got it. You're like making a commitment to make it better.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things about overcoming objections, because we have wholesaled as well. And one of the things that we're told is, well, oh, if I were to default, that's like the best thing that could ever happen to you. Your credit would be great, and your principal would be paid down, and not you would be $25,000 in debt and facing foreclosure, right? So one time it happens, okay, the realtor might be, okay, fine, maybe it's like, but it continues to happen because these are repeated patterns. They continue to make the payments late. The realtor or the seller, especially, a seller who's upset that they even had to sell that way in the first place, is going to want to make sure that it's being taken care of. They're going to be calling that bank every single month asking, hey, was the payment made yet? And when it's not, that realtor's never going to sell that way again. They're never going to, once they get that substitute, nope, sorry, not going to
You've
happen.
been burned before. Absolutely. And I'm okay. You know what? You don't want to set up servicing. Honestly, I think the best option is just to set up an auto draft that comes out on the 1st and lets that mortgage get paid automatically.
100%, yeah.
Why not just send the seller a mortgage statement? Hey, here you
It's
go
not hard.
every month.
It's
Why?
not that. That's something that somebody's CPA could do. And if you're a good investor, you have somebody taking care of your books. And they're going to want those. They can go in there, they can log in, they can download that mortgage statement, whatever the case is. And even if you don't have one, you should be doing that. It's really not that difficult to set something up to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to go log in, get all my mortgage statements, and send them to the sellers. Give
You need
them.
them for accounting. You need them to address your interest and principal every month for accounting. So just be in the habit of pulling your statements and emailing them out.
Yeah. Yes, I think making sure that the seller is comfortable after they walk away from the closing table is going to be really important. You have to keep that trust. You have to make them feel like, okay, this wasn't the worst thing I could have done.
Because in my experience, the number one thing that I've had due on sale called for is because the seller is calling the bank about the mortgage.
100%. Yeah. That's huge. That is huge. And if you don't give them any reason to call the bank, then they won't, and you won't have that problem. It's very simple. It's just like being in a relationship. You have to communicate. You
Yeah,
just have to. You can't be in this marriage and not talk to one another. It doesn't have to be every day. You don't have to be BFFs, but show them some consideration at least. So I think those are some key points that make really good investors and buyers for sure. If you can keep on the up and up with that, then you would mitigate 90% of the problems that you come across buying these substitutes.
absolutely. And maybe you do that with your sellers and you get a mouthpiece that brings you more deals because they want to tell everybody that's in that situation. Because the reality is nowadays, a lot of people are going to be in this situation. It
Yeah,
is a prime market for us right now.
it really is. It
If you
really
keep
is.
business along the way, you're going to attract more business than you know what to do with.
That is so true. I recently just closed on one in Holiday, Florida a couple months back. And the situation was this guy was he's a cop, and he just got divorced, and his wife moved like an hour away from him down to like Clearwater. And he was like, I need to sell this house. I've had it on the market for a year. I got this under contract December 31st. And he fell out of contract with his realtor on December 30th. And I had spoken to his realtor, and she told me absolutely not. He's not entertaining any subject twos. This man found my information, called me, asked me to help him with this house. I found someone who does transitional living, corporate transitional living, and she ended up purchasing the property. He was then able to rent an apartment 5 minutes away from his kids. He can see his kids more often. He's closer to work. He can take his kids to school. And he sent me a message, and he said that if he has any other friends of his who are facing similar situations, he's going to let them know about me, because I helped him more than that realtor was able to help him. And, for me, that means a lot, right? It means like that's what we're in this business for, is to make people's lives better, not to make them worse. You don't want somebody to have sold a sub to you and then regret it months later down the line because their mortgage is not getting paid or they're getting foreclosed on. So do good so you can do good, right? So we're trying to do as good as we can. And I think that's really important, is being the mouthpiece. They will be that mouthpiece either way, if you do good or bad, right? But you really want them to be talking about you because you did good.
1,000%. Well, thank you so much for this week. I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you. I hope you do too.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Bye.